I find your discussion of what happened after 9/11 very much to the point. But I'd like to add another point of view. And as we know, students of history, that wars and violence are perpetuated because there are people who are benefited by them. And if there were no money in war, there would be no wars. There's tremendous amount of money in wars. It's one of the, I believe, one of the reasons we don't have peace in the Middle East, because there are powerful forces that are making a lot of money off the lack of peace. And until we get until we address that, we're not going to probably have peace in the Middle East, I'm afraid. But, you know, you talked about this feeling of needing to be afraid. And what I thought about was the Cold War. You know, what did we have after the Cold War, after the Russians, after we no longer had the Russian accented villains, if you will, in the media? Right, thank you. Soviet, well, it's from my, okay. Yes, but that's, you know, we don't have Boris Godunov anymore, if you will, for those of you who know the Rocky and Bullwinkle. The prototype of that person, that evil empire, if you will. We didn't have that. How do you, it's to the benefit of certain groups to perpetuate that. And unfortunately, 9/11 provided ammunition for those groups in our society to create a new evil empire. And I think it's, you know, it's tragic. I agree with you. But I think it also needs to be looked at in the, we never were without that evil force. I remember, you know, they used to tell us in elementary school about the bomb. You know, how do you protect yourself from the bomb? You get under your desk, right? You put your head down like that, right? But I remember that vividly, and this is the same thing. You know, how do we protect ourselves from something that might happen, you know, with respect to terrorists and terrorists?
I think you raise a very, very good point, and I want to just kind of put my 2 cents in there and say that this is exactly the reason why we have movements like the Gulen movement. A lot of what conspired that day was lack of education, poverty, money. All these are a factor, and these are all issues that the social movement, the Gulen movement, tries to address in hopes that it can build further world peace and alleviate issues of this sort from coming up in the future. And again, I can direct the question to Dr. Ergil about his views on the Gulen movement as far as its contribution to peace. Has it been successful? What's lacking? What can we expect in the future?
Okay, now, this is a very valid question. See, in order to have peace, first of all, you need understanding. But understanding is not enough. I mean, it doesn't feed the stomach. You need justice. Justice at all levels. Meaning to share the benefits of the system, whatever that system is, relatively satisfactorily. I'm not saying relatively equally. We know that there's no equality in the world, but relatively, how would I say, in a just way, acceptable way. For that, people must not feel, first of all, to be left out, and secondly, devoid of living honorably, not feeling abject. What Mr. Gulen's movement has done is to empower the individual first and the lower echelons of the civil society. This is very important. This is promotion of peace from below. You know, making peace within, not between inimical sides, not competing sides, which may be extrinsic to each other. This is within. So one gentleman that I was here, this gentleman was saying that, you know, until a few years ago, I have not gone out of the boundaries of my province, even in Turkey. Now he is in the United States. He was raised by the benevolence of the people who have contributed monetarily to this movement, and others have organized hostels, prep courses, schools, even universities. Can you imagine? I mean, you can start as a little child, and then you can grow up to be a university graduate with the help of this group. This is amazing. And the secular rulers of my country, from which I come from, I mean, I am a white Turk, as we call in Turkey, have not done that. We did not create that relationship of solidarity, of the feeling of helping each other, empowering each other. That's the key word. Empowering the individual and the civil society. And that's why the Turkish establishment and their main instrument, the state, has been very, very suspicious of this movement, or it could be any movement which is not directed from above, you know, which is not official. In fact, the Turkish government has organized even the religion to be an official instrument of the state. All imams, for example, you know, preachers are government officials in Turkey. The sermons are centrally scripted and then, you know, repeated all over Turkey, for example. You know? And we still call ourselves secular. Secular meaning controlled by the state. I mean, this is not a definition. This is not a definition, because then we have, as children, Turkish children, we have memorized the cliche that secularism is a separation of the state and religion. But religion, I mean, state controls the religion in Turkey. That's a contradiction. But so we have not really adopted the Western understanding of secularism. Now, there's being discussed, and sooner or later, we should be a part of the new constitution. And we'll adopt this more Western understanding of secularism, meaning the state remaining aloof of all religions at equidistance to all religions. You know? Fortunately, you know, we are pushing.
Yes, Professor.
I must thank you for this very timely session with you that was facilitated by the Peace Islands, because I could think of no more important coalition for the region, particularly the Middle East, Anatolian region, than the work that is being done to resuscitate and reconcile Turkey with Israel. It's probably one of the most important coalitions that can facilitate a much broader application of peace. We've known for many years that the Anatolian region was a crossroads for many civilizations to interact with each other, which we know through our history books as the Silk Road. But you're talking to a situation here in New York where it is in fact a wounded city, psychologically wounded city. But I often contextualize that crisis in the context of the fact that there was a time when the assets called the World Trade Center was valued at somewhere between 1.6 and 7.6 billion dollars. But the financial crisis as a result of the derivatives market was 64 trillion that damaged the global economy in such a profound way. You're talking about a phenomenon which was about 6,000 times more damaging than the destruction of the World Trade Center. Formidable power. And I'd like for you to just discuss briefly what architecture that you see within the region, the Anatolian region, which could facilitate that kind of coalition by which certain people who would rather manipulate the fear of war in the region could answer to the kind of intellectual tradition and methodology of Gulen. Thank you.
Very sophisticated question.
Like,
Before that, before answering your question, it just occurred to me that I should discuss the point why a movement like this and its philosophy has not really permeated the Islamic world as much as it should. It's very important. This is a peaceful Islamic movement. It believes in coexistence of cultures and religions side by side, but not isolated, interacting. This is very important. You could live side by side, but without knocking on your doors and conversing. But this is promoting dialogue or conversation, but coming to a new synthesis. This is important. Creating a mutual world, the aim of which is creating a mutual world. How come it has not been that influential in the Islamic world? I mean, I have asked this question to myself and tried to find out the answer, and I came up with two answers. First of all, it's the nature of the regimes in Islamic societies. They are tyrannical, very authoritarian, top-down. They would not allow civic movements like this. Those tyrannical regimes allow religion as the only, because it is a legitimate institution, because they cannot forsake religion, but only tolerant to their existence as beliefs, not as opposition movements that will grow out of them. And as you know, in the lack of any opposition political movement, religion has become the cocoon in tyrannical or dictatorial Islamic societies, the medium of opposition. And unfortunately, this has made opposition religious and religion political. As more Islamic forces take root in the Islamic world, they have to cater the needs of the people. And they have to make the water run, the electricity on, municipal services, education, whatever. And they will become more worldly oriented. And I think religion and politics will be separated naturally rather than artificially. So first, the regimes have not allowed such civic movements to infiltrate. And secondly, the Islamic scholarly circles, they don't want competition because they have frozen jurisprudence, meaning reinterpretation of the text, original text, verbal and written. Mr. Gulen is a Sufi, meaning that he has found spiritual ways of reinterpreting the world, still remaining loyal to the origins, reinterpreting those the words, the Quranic, the Hadiths, and so forth, according to the needs of today. They don't want that because they are firmly in grips of the old sayings, the old interpretations, and they don't want competition because they will lose everything they have. They dictate the old interpretations of religion. Okay, now coming back to your question. As far as I have understood it, I may have misunderstood it, but as far as I have understood it,
You're doing fine.
I'll try. Because I was thinking something else, and I caught up with you in the middle of your question. In Turkey, so Turkey is in between the Arab world and the Persian world, you know, and Islam is totally interpreted differently. In Turkish Islam, there's no clergy whatsoever. There's not even the scholarly circles that the Arab Islam has. You know, something like a center, something like the El Azhar, for example, of Cairo. In Turkey, there's not. Everyone can be the imam of themselves. You know. No in between or go between God and the individual. Shia Islam is like a church system, as you know. It has its own nomenclatura, it has its own religious hierarchy, and so forth. Turkish Islam, with its Sufi traditions, with its Alevi interpretations of Islam, which is also connected with Central Asian shamanism and so forth, is much more culturally colorful, richer, of course, and together it says to us that as long as there are human beings in need of different things, in need of peace, in need of understanding and so forth, let's look at the texts, the holy texts, the holy practices of the Prophet especially, and the four caliphs. Skip the rest because they are historical and they are Arabic or Persian. We will see so many messages born out of the daily reality and so forth. There we can reconcile these texts and the richness of social reality and practice. And that will not be contradictory. That will be neither non-religious nor heterodox, but rather a modern interpretation, understanding of religion, which is more beneficial to the society and to the individual. And here, this will also save the individual from the tyranny of the group and of a orthodox interpretation of religion for the sake of the group. For example, in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, when we talk about freedom, in fact, we don't talk about individual freedom. We talk about the independence of the state. Only the Middle Easterns know this. There's no individual there. There's no individual freedom in terms of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Mr. Gulen tells us that, yes, you may be a part of a community, but you are also individuals. You can place yourself, your individuality in the group voluntarily. This is the defining word, voluntarily. Your belonging to a group is not enslaving, but it's voluntary. Another thing which might be very useful for us to understand this moment. He says, for all the Muslims, ethnic identities, linguistic attributions and so forth may differ you. But belonging to a faith, being children of a religion, is your greater identity. So you can unite under that umbrella. That's fine. But then what about the Jews, the Christians, so forth? He says they have the same right to organize and take their place beneath you equally. What difference you and the other person with a different religion is your merit, what you do. If you are a shoemaker, if you make the shoe better than the other, it doesn't matter what their religion is, but their professional proficiency, which I like. As I said, I am a chronicle secular, but I have come to admire the man after I started writing the book. Not before. Did that suffice?
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have.
John in the front and then John in the back.
I have a question for you, but I'd like to comment on some of the other questions and remarks about peace, war, and such like. It's very simple. If you control conditioning, which starts when you're young,
That's true.
and it starts in your family, school, church, and so on, it is called, and a lot of people don't like these words, conditioning is partly propaganda and psychological operations. And if you start young, you believe your family, you believe your teachers. And so in many, many countries, those same teachers, those same schools, those same organizations have a philosophy. They're conditioned, and it's passed on. Until something's done to turn that back with a different attitude of peace, respect your neighbor, and so on, peace won't exist, which is why governments, media, I believe that about 84% of mainstream media around the world today is controlled by industries, basically three, political parties or religious parties. So until such time people are allowed or given the ability to think for themselves, there will not be peace. There will be periods of peace, but there will be periods of war, because war is very, very profitable. Now I'll ask my question. For a long time, Mr. Gulen has had many problems with the Turkish state. With the changes going on and the desires of the Turkish government today to become a mediator and a leader in the region, and relaxing this attitude of total control, do you think that relationships between the Turkish administration and the Gulen operation will be better? Do you think, I think Turkey is number one for imprisoning journalists at the moment. Many of them, and I think a majority of them, are related to talking, either supporting the Gulen operation or talking generally about freedom and freedom of the press. Do you think things are going to improve?
Oh, let me correct you. Yes, there are lots of journalists in prison, but they are unfortunately victims of our penal code and our anti-terrorism code. You see? Yes, it has nothing to do with the Gulen movement. You see, when you say something about, let's say, well, this PKK, you know, the terrorist organization, the Kurdish terrorist organization, when you say the PKK is in fact not a terrorist organization, but a protest organization that is propagating in favor of a terrorist organization, so you are an accessory of terror and you are put in. You know? That's simple. That's simple. Because I have gone through such legal cases. You know? Shall I tell you one of the justifications why I was sued? I mean, you wouldn't believe it. The second
Sued or prosecuted?
suit. If I was prosecuted, I wouldn't be here. I would lose my job and my civic rights. I was invited by the Bursa Bar Association to talk on democracy. Think of it. I mean, the context is so contradictory to the things that I was indicted for. I said, Mr. İnönü, the second president of Turkey, has not allowed Turkey to enter the Second World War. And some ultra nations said he is really destroying the masculinity, not destroying, there should be a better word for it.
Damaging?
Huh?
Damaging?
Let's say, let's find
Undermining.
It could even be a more medical thing, emasculating Turkish masculinity, emasculating Turkish maleness, they said. Can you imagine that? No, this is on record. He was accused to do so. These are the alterations. I said, think of it, you know. This associates violence, meaning war, with a sexual discourse. And preventing the Turkish army or the Turkish nation to go violate another country has turned into some kind of an accusation. You know, what kind of a perversion is this? You know why this should be for? Insulting the Turkish armed forces. And I was sued, and the court procedure went on for 1.5 years. Just saying that, you know, Turkey wasn't allowed by its president to rape another country. That's it. 1.5 years. The money I spent, the anxiety that, you know, I had, my family and so forth. So this is that easy. Those laws are there to protect the state. Fortunately, we are changing them, you know, but it's not that easy as you know. That mentality, that top-down mentality, is unfortunately is like a tumor, you know. You just shave it off, and it's metastasis. Oh, I mean, there's jumped everywhere.
Continues the condition.
Exactly.
We have a.
Could I answer you this way?
More or less.
Yeah.
I've got more questions for you after.
Okay.
We have a gentleman in the back. A question?
What is the attitude of the Gulen movement towards the state? You've spoken a lot about sort of the attitude of the state towards the movement and some of the suspicions. What are the expectations, what are the hopes, and what are the attitudes of members of the movement and the leadership towards the Turkish state and the other states in the region at the moment?
Very good question.
Well, Mr. Gulen himself, you know, starting from him, Mr. Gulen himself never advocates any negative stance, position against the state. This is our state, good or bad, you know. We have to accept its existence for law and order. We may criticize it, but not in a protesting way, you know. But this doesn't mean that we will accept everything the state does, you know. So let's not expect everything from the state. Let's do whatever we ought to do. And this may, in time, transform the state as well to cater our needs. Well, I think this you see, a man of this peaceful nature has exemplified the way that the state should be transformed into being a more responsible, more responding institution to the society. But he never advocates either rebellion or an open protest against the state. So he doesn't do that.
Just to follow up on the gentleman's question, the Gulen movement is not just limited to Turkey. It is a worldwide movement with institutions in over 130 different countries. would the same answer hold true for
Yeah.
the regimes of other governments as well?
Oh, definitely. You see, Gulen movement is a civic movement. Let's accept that. So, you know, showing its existence everywhere, operating in different cultures, in different regimes, dictatorial, dictatorships, democracies, in between regimes, and so forth. They fit into those systems, directly deal with the civil society, you know, in the language of that society, you know, in the culture of that society, but at the same time presents examples of being good, you know, being good through individual behavior, individual contemplation, and so forth. You know? It's not direct sort of teacher to disciple sort of conversation. Teaching through example. This is very important. You know, he emphasizes this all the time. So he cannot take. He has not, and he has not advocated a political stance, or advocated a political form of government. In fact, when he is asked, and I addressed this question to him, what kind of a political system or a state would you like? He says, even in the Quran and the original text, the description, all the prescriptions of a political system, political order, the form of a state is mentioned in about 3 to 5% of all the texts, of all the volumes. So Islam does not advocate a form of government. And he takes this very seriously, which I like. Otherwise, it will be a political thing, and it will be contentious with the political regimes or other, you know, forms of ideologies. He doesn't want to turn his teaching, whatever you call it, into a political agenda, to a political ideology. Okay?
Thank you very much, Professor.
The separation of church and state.
Exactly. All right. Now here, this is very important. Although Mr. Gulen is accused to be leading a religious movement by the Turkish establishment, I think through education, through promotion of businesses, which create all those economic resources, and just like the Calvinism and so forth, the Protestant ethic, you know, saying that richness is the what do you call it? Is the benevolence of God rewarding your toil, you know, your work, your efforts. So richness is not to be condemned, provided that you share it with others. You give your hand to others and elevate them as much as you do good to yourself. This is very important. And in that sense, Mr. Gulen's first target is the individual, then the community, then the society. And he sees all these efforts, all this work to be working for the good, to please God as well. Not only to bring welfare to the society, but to please God. Mind you, in everything contemporary, what he says, everything modern that he says, he's a man of religion. He's not a political leader. You know? In that sense, economic activity, education, promoting peace and so forth. Peace at home, peace abroad. is promoting secularism from below. Although he is accused of being a religious leader promoting religion in the society, he is the locomotive of secularism from below, you know, rather than the secularist attitude of the state from above, which is a policy. It's a political agenda. But his is a sociological process. I mean, he has initiated a political, a social process, a cultural process from below up. This is very important.
What we call grassroots.
Yes.
You also have a question right in the middle?
What do you think about the argument that Mr. Gulen and the movement were more nationalist and statist in the 90s, and when Mr. Gulen has come to the United States, do you think that he has changed some of his ideas about some liberal values and nationalism regarding the, for example, Kurdish conflict? And my second question is, I mean, why do you think Mr. Gulen was never very critical about modernism, capitalism, you know, globalism? Why the other, for example, some Islamists in Turkey and in the Middle East were very critical about these concepts? Thank you.
The first question, I'm pretty sure that Mr. Gulen has learned more in the U.S. Because look, this is, you know, whatever you say about the U.S., this is the center of the world, you know. This is the new empire. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the tallest building of one time, the Empire State Building, is called the Empire State, you know. In that sense, looking at the world from the top of the world here, I think has oriented them to international matters more than that was available to him in Turkey from a Middle Eastern perspective. And I think now he is better versed in international relations than he was here. You know? And mind you, people learn. So yes, to your first question. And to your second question, what was the second question?
The second question was, I mean, why he was never very critical
Ah,
about
okay.
modernism and, you know, some liberal concepts, capitalism,
Okay.
and the other Islamic groups were so critical.
He's very critical of the Islamic world today. He says there is no Islamic world. There are only individual Islamic countries, Islamic societies, he says. Because Islamic civilization has been left in the 16th, 17th century. It has not advanced since. Now we have to revitalize it. If we have to revitalize it, we have to generate our own enlightenment and marry faith with science. So we have to be the producers of science and its byproduct technology in order to have our own civilization. Which is really fed and fired with the Islamic faith that he propagates. That is moderate, understanding, open to diversity, reconciling, and so forth. Otherwise, we will always be dependent on the West if we do not develop our civilization. But today, Islam is no more a part of any living civilization. Well, this is pretty critical and rather harsh in terms of realistic, of course, at the same time. And he proposes them. He says, okay, let's start our renaissance. But that renaissance must not be based on the wild capitalism of today. Yes to market economy, but that market economy has to have a heart. You know? It must be based on justice. And that justice can be injected into capitalism through solidarity, good faith, and the things that he propagates. To globalization, well, he says, how can you prevent globalization? In my words, you know, you can say, down with globalization and do the following. Stop the convertibility of your money. Cut off the telephone line, international lines. Stop traveling the world. Stop importation and exportation. Call all your students into your country and so forth. Can you do that? If you cannot do it, you have to reconcile with globalization. You know? Benefit from it as much as you can. Try to prevent its damaging aspects of it. And that's what Mr. Gulen says.
Okay, the time is getting late.
Yeah, maybe what we can do, we can get maybe 3 or 4 questions at the same time.
Okay, well, what I was going to suggest was this. 3 or 4 questions was one idea, but I was going to say that for those that want to stay afterwards, we can definitely, the press is still here, we can definitely cover some more. But I will just take maybe just 2 more questions, and at that point we can end the program formally. But like I said, the press is still here, and for those that have additional questions, it could be an informal process as well.
2 questions at the same time, right?
At the same time, we're going to take both questions and then we'll get 1 answer. Well, first we have the gentleman in the front. I know you've already asked the question, but and if I can see a second hand for the second question, okay. I'm going to take the gentleman. I'm also going to take. We'll take 3 questions at the same time, and then hopefully, if there's any overlapping, you can answer them together. First, please.
Okay, this is very current. There's a lot of global attention at the moment on Cyprus. And I think everybody knows that some decades ago, Turkey had to intervene in Cyprus to protect the Turkish population. If you are able to think, as Mr. Gulen, do you really feel there is any way that these 2 diverse cultures will ever be able to live under one administration?
I think along the ways of Mr. Gulen, right? This is a question to addressed to me.
You're at the moment his.
He wouldn't answer this.
Maybe that's why I asked.
This is political. Well, I'll answer.
No,
first of all, we can just get.
But not in his name.
If we can get to the 2 questions, and then we could do a joint answer together.
So it seems like, and I'm losing my voice, so I apologize in advance, but it seems like the majority of the last set of questions really geared towards more of a political angle. I'm more interested in the social angle, and as a woman, especially as a Muslim woman raised in America, I've had a lot of questions that really I would categorize as superficial, external appearance of Islam. As a woman, of course, I'm speaking. I'm really intrigued by the social movement and what Mr. Gulen has to say about women in regards to education, in regards to the workforce, in regards to the political realm, in society in general, what their role is, what their rights are, and obviously that's something that probably a book alone can be written about. But
you should do it, you know.
Maybe in the next 10 years.
And if we just get the 3rd question too, maybe gentleman right here with the blue, and then we can get an answer all together. By the way, all very good questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for Peace Island Institute for putting this on. I have to profess my ignorance. I did not know much about Mr. Gulen or the movement. I'm trying to correct that ignorance as we speak. It's a wonderful group, wonderful person. I'm curious though how the movement or Mr. Gulen feels about truth and reconciliation councils as a way of dialogue. And I understand the causes and conditions are not there, well, not even in this country, never mind Turkey with the current situation and things like that. But if he has spoken to that, or the movement has an idea or ideological view on Truth and Reconciliation Councils.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Well,
Okay.
we can try now. All very good questions. Hopefully, the professor can try to answer all three.
Okay. I'll leave the Cyprus thing to the last. Now, as regards women, I think this is one of the, maybe the most controversial point in Turkey and in more traditional societies, you know, the status of women. Mr. Gulen comes from a rural background, and he's a man, never married, never had a family. In fact, he resembles the monasterial understanding of religious personality. He values women very much, but I have sensed and I have read in his text that he would prefer women to carry on the traditional roles that have been attributed to women, you know, motherly, caring roles and so forth. You know? That I have to admit. In terms of, for example, covering the heads, just like you do. You know? When he was asked, at a time when girls with headscarves were not allowed at universities, which was a disastrous practice of the secular government. They were barring girls covering their heads, although they had won the university entrance exams to take lessons to go on with their education. He said this: if someone prefers to cover their heads, believing that they ought to do so because of their religious belief, they must have all the right to do so. So, preventing them to do so is evil. But keeping them away from university education just because they are covering their heads is a bigger evil. So those girls can open up their heads, and the sins of who forced them to do is something that God would know what to do about. You see? This is a very modern interpretation. You know? I admire him. He says, he doesn't say open up. If he says people believe that this is their religious obligation, they may cover their heads. To force them to uncover is evil, but to keep them away from education is more evil. So you can forsake the lesser evil for the bigger one. And many of the girls followed this and got their higher education. You know? He says women can take up their place anywhere, at any level of the society, but he says, my preference is that, you know, with their compassion and so forth, the more traditional roles, you know. For me, this is a bias. This is a cultural bias. It's a cultural bias. But then, I mean, he's come from a rural culture, a masculine culture, a more traditional culture. Truth and reconciliation. So this is a post-conflict period sort of practice. Right after armed conflict ends and a lasting peace process is crystallized, Truth and Reconciliation Committees work to take the place of courts and court procedures. You know this as much as I do. That has not been put into practice today yet, because in the Kurdish instance, a ceasefire has been declared, but this phase has not been reached yet. You know. But what the Gulen movement does is that they convene more than one national meeting every year, and several times on the Kurdish case, including, inviting many scholars, many public opinion makers, thinkers, journalists, and so forth, community leaders from all over the country to convene in a certain place called Abant, and they discuss these matters, not in the form of a Truth and Reconciliation Committee, but there are Kurds, lots of Kurds and so on, but a sort of a reconciliation effort, but truth-telling, no, because in the truth-telling phase, you know, those perpetrators, the criminals on both sides, have to come together, face each other, and tell each other what they have done, what wrong they have done to each other, and then ask forgiveness, as you know. That has not been done yet in Turkey, because one side has always been official, and officialdom does not apologize, as you know.
Hasn't happened here either. Let's say no.
In terms of Cyprus, you see, history is interpreted in different ways. And what communities do to each other is to excommunicate them from their history. Yeah? The Balkan nations, when they rose for their independence, excluded the Turks from their history. The Turks, after deporting Armenians, excluded them from the history of their country. And that history was very much Armenian as well. And unfortunately, after the Republic, the Turkish nationalists tried to do this to the Kurds, but they couldn't, because the Kurds were too numerous and were too tough. You know. Now they won their not only identity, but the acknowledgement of their existence in this country. You know. In Cyprus, history starts for the Turks in 1960, when the Greeks brought down the mutual government, the Turkish-Greek government, mutual government that is shared. For the Cypriot Greeks, history starts with 1974, when the Turkish forces invaded the islands. You see? So that interim period is not shared. Hence, the way history is interpreted is where each side has lost. You know, the Greeks lost the whole of the island in 74. Turks lost in 1960 and gained after 74. You know? So, if these two bifurcated interpretations of history can be converged somewhere, and a line is drawn, like in every reconciliation process, where the past is left in the past, and a future with the will to build a future together is decided on, they can have a walk in history together. And that has not been done yet in Cyprus.